been going on for many months, and then the destruction costs to pay at the end of that. That's from one seizure. Hewlett-Packard seized well over 100 million counterfeit items. I'm not going to give you the value of that, but it's considerable, and we are responsible for paying from the bottom line for the destruction and disposal of those products. So, you know, just to give you an idea of the kind of financial situation that we're in from the private sector and the commitment that we're making. We would like to see on the supply chain a very careful look at all the participants, the carriers, the forwarders, the importers, the consigners, the declarants, and Patrick has named some of the points, so I'm not going to go into them, because we feel that there are gaps in the legislation and the regulations that exist that don't control, for instance, the sufficiency of the contractual relationship between the supply chain elements. Let me be generic there, not to risk upsetting anybody, and that they manage to avoid their responsibilities in law by washing their hands of the issue once counterfeit goods are discovered and detained. They then step away from the issue, and it's impossible for us to recover costs once we have a judgment. So I think there's quite a lot that we need to do and we can talk about, and hopefully if we stimulate some discussion, we can see, you know, some key points that might come out of that. But that's something we should be looking at. We have, you know, as an operational example, several instances where forwarders are sending goods having received advance payment to fraudulent and non-existent addresses. That speaks to the lack of due diligence that some parties to the supply chain you know, are involving themselves with, and that's not acceptable. Mr. Zhu has made the point, and so has Antonis. Should pay the costs, but we have significant difficulties in identifying and tracking them down. And if we go on to some of the other issues that are raised on the points we're talking about today, financial constraints for developing countries. This is an issue, and we as business see this on a day-to-day basis. We are growing, all of us, attempting to grow our businesses in the developing world, and are very conscious of the difficulties of doing that. And one of the impediments to successfully expanding our businesses is counterfeiting. And we invest heavily in supporting training to law enforcement, customs, judges, and all elements of what's going on there in developing the judiciary and the whole legal system in countries which are struggling to deal with these issues. We, of course, are legitimate investors in businesses in these countries. We pay taxes, and our interest is in building a sustainable process, which counterfeiting and everything associated with it clearly doesn't do. I've got a couple of examples of documents here, which I think, you know, I'd urge you all to take away. Recently issued by BASCAP. Current and emerging intellectual property issues for businesses. And that's not just for Hewlett-Packard. In fact, it's aimed more at the SME market. So a clear issue there. And finally, talking about the contribution of the private sector to cost-effective and socially relevant enforcement. We think that improving the legal framework to make for instance, simplified destruction processes work more effectively and more quickly will save all of us a lot of money and time and effort. That more efforts need to be made. We would like to engage in recycling and destruction more than we do, but the facilities are often not there to make this possible. And on that note, I'll stop and say thank you very much for the opportunity.